Welcome to None of the Above. My name is Steve Nemirovsky and I'm your host. None of the Above is a political program where we examine the causes of dysfunction and polarization in our political system and in our government. And on each show, hopefully try to offer some solution sets that will help get us back to a better balance with respect to both of these. In our last show, our last sequence of shows, we talked about the impact of redistricting. We're going to shift our focus today. We're going to talk about lack of civility. I've been in government and politics a good chunk of my career now. I think those of you that have seen prior shows know that I still lobby. And one of the things I miss is the civility that used to be part of the discourse. There used to be a time where even no matter how polarized things were, there was a level of discourse, functionality, compromise that was part of the system, and somewhere along the line we lost that. In Illinois, I think we lost it about 10 or 12 years ago. That's where I do my lobbying. At the congressional level, some people would suggest we started to lose it in the 90s. But regardless, it's just not there anymore. And it's hard to solve problems when you lack that civility, when you lack the camaraderie, the ability to get together and compromise. And I'm very concerned about this. I'm very concerned about the tone of the dialogue. I'm very concerned about the language that's used. Of late, people particularly on media, on television shows, try to go out of their way to prove if a politician has not spoken the exact truth. And in many cases, they say that they're lying. This is an example, I think, of language that I never would have expected to see. There is a certain amount of finesse in the language of politics. People may misspeak, but I don't think anyone's intent is ever to misrepresent and to lie, to deliberately misrepresent and to lie. If you're a politician nowadays and there's always a microphone in front of you, always a camera on you, you're going to make a mistake. I make mistakes daily. I'm sure all of us misspeak at least once a day when we meant to say something one way and it came out another way. It doesn't necessarily mean we were lying. It just means in the heat of battle, in the context of the situation, whatever, we misspoke and we move on, or we say we're sorry. We seem to have lost that. And again, particularly where the media is concerned. One of the things I've talked about in many shows is the fact that the internet, I think, is the greatest engine for democracy we've had, in over 200 years. But at the same time, the internet drives an instant need for news, and there is instant news, and the facts aren't checked. And I think what's happened is the media, the television media, the radio media, they're trying to keep up with this, and everyone's trying to be sensational. Everyone's trying to draw an audience. And I think when they try and be sensational, that they step back from the civility and enter into a land of a lack of civility, and I think that spills over to the conversation in the political world as well. I think each feeds on each other. So we're going to start a two-part series today, and I thought what better way to do that but to have the head of the Democratic Party here in Pitkin County present on one show and have the head of the Republican Party present on another show. And when we're done with both shows, we'll see if we can come away with some notions of how we can get back to more civility, more ability to talk and solve problems together. One of the areas where I think dysfunction has shown itself to be proven and the lack of civility has been very apparent is in discussions that have been present regarding our federal budget and our federal deficit. So in the context of our conversations about civility, what we're going to do is drill down a bit and talk about the debt and talk about the budget so that we understand what these processes are about and how these processes can be impacted by this dysfunction and this polarization. We may not have solutions for you, although the good news is we, for the first time in a long time, we actually have an operating federal budget. We haven't had that in a while, and that's a good thing. So throughout these two shows on civility, we're going to spend some time examining the federal budget and the debt structure, and hopefully you come away with a much better understanding of how the system should work and could work, and hopefully will work. We are graced today with political royalty. I made that up. I like that. Graced by political royalty. Blanca O'Leary is joining us. Blanca is the chairperson of the Pitkin County Democratic Organization. She is a member at large of the Democratic National Committee. And she has had the thrill of participating in the last two Democratic National Conventions. One as a delegate and one as a superdelegate. And if you'll think back to some of our earlier shows, the theme has been get active, get involved. We say on every show, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Blanca is not just political royalty. She's someone who stepped up. She's active in politics. And that's one of the things we want to start talking about today. In fact, Blanca, we're going to talk about how did you get started in politics and what you've accomplished and how other people can get started.
Steve, first of all, thanks for having
Sure.
me. It's quite a treat to be here. You're the political royalty. You're the one with the published book, not
There
me.
you go.
I'm from El Paso, Texas. I'm the eldest of five kids, and my father was politically active. He's an engineer. He wasn't politically active as much as I am. I mean, he had a full-time job, 5 kids to raise, things like that. But a friend of his was running for the office of state representative in El Paso. So he dragged us, the oldest kids, over to go help Paul do door knocking to get people out to vote for Paul, and we won. And so I was 11 and a half or 12 at that time. So I got the bug then, and this is really great. And these were things that my dad had been telling us for so long, that you needed to participate. And
by the way, your dad did a great thing by getting you active.
Oh,
I mean,
thank you. He's still alive. He might.
Is he still active?
Yeah, in his own way. He's 80 years old, 80 plus years old. So he's active in encouraging all of his children to stay involved. But then after that, our next big race was when Sissy Farenthold ran for governor of the state of Texas. And that, first of all, a female governor. There hadn't been a female governor since Ma Ferguson. So it was quite exciting. And of course, she was very progressive. And we lived in a very conservative neighborhood. As a matter of fact, we were the only Latino family from 1st through 8th grade. But my father had a gigantic Sissy Farenthold sign. We had a backyard fence that people could see it coming up the road. With great visibility. So it taught me all about visibility, big signs, how cheaply, a cheap sign could really make so much of a difference. And we had campaigned actively for Sissy, who of course lost, but who remains a friend of our families. So that really perked things up for me. I mean, not only does really campaigning involved door-to-door, nitty-gritty, getting out on Saturdays instead of watching cartoons, but also women should be running. And then, of course, there was a big dry spell when a lot of women weren't running. But I got that idea in my head since I was pretty young. I was 12, 13 years old at that time.
Okay,
that's
so
where I got
at some point we have to get you from Texas to Aspen, and then we have to get you to be in charge of the party here. So let's make that leap and talk about how you...
That'll go fast. I went to the University of Texas at El Paso. In Austin, excuse me. When I went there for undergraduate law school, I clerked for the Court of Appeals. I met my future husband at UT Austin, and we were married after I graduated from law school. We moved to Houston. We'd been coming here over the summers for a long time. He worked for a big law firm. He became a lawyer after me. He worked for a big law firm, and he didn't really like working for a big law firm, but the only time he was happy was here in Aspen. So, he did this for about 15, 17 years. We all talked, and he was not happy except for being here. And so we decided to make the leap, and that's how he came. Moving from one of the biggest states in the union to one of the smaller states in the union, where in Houston there were 4 million people population, and here there's 4 million in the whole state. That was a big shock. So I had to find something that I was going to be involved with, and I was very involved in politics in Texas, so it was natural to become very involved.
So what was
here.
the party like when you got here? Was it very active and organized, or is that something that you kind of took over?
I think when you're the chairperson, that's the cool thing about being the chairperson.
Yeah.
You bring your identity to the party. We had a very hardworking, long-serving chair, Camilla Auger, who had done a beautiful job for a long time, and she everyone knew her, and in the state, all the state officials knew her. She was active with a lot of the candidates. When candidates came, she helped with organizing their events. But she had a different perspective on how that was done. And Camila served for a long time. And then when it became my turn, I came in when Barack Obama had been doing a lot of grassroots. And that was my attraction, besides the fact that he was against the Iraq War. My other attraction to his campaign was that he wanted to do grassroots, and grassroots was going to be the main focus of his campaign, and it was in 2008. And
explain quickly for our viewers, when you talk grassroots, what do you mean?
That means door knocking.
Door knocking.
That means door knocking. It doesn't only involve the big fancy fundraisers, which we need, we have to have, and that's what makes it so powerful here in Aspen, because we, that's why people listen to Aspen, because we do host good fundraisers. But we also, we have a lot of voters here that are Democratic voters, but if we don't get them to the polls, then your voice isn't heard. So your voice is heard in Denver by the fact that we can get a lot of voters to the polls here in the Roaring Fork Valley.
And have you been successful at that? Have you increased turnout and registration?
Yes. The registration was already pretty good in Aspen. We did increase the registration, but our percentage for the presidency went up dramatically under President Obama's elections, both of them, a little bit higher in 2008 than in 12, as a matter of fact, but that was something around the whole country. But it was the highest for a Democratic candidate for president since Kennedy. So yeah, we did quite well. So
awesome.
Yeah, it isn't because of us, just only because of us. It is because our candidate was very popular in 2008.
Well, I know it's a candidate, but I've worked in enough campaigns to know it's the people on the ground, like you said, it's the grassroots, it's knocking on the doors, and you've obviously built an organization to accomplish this. So
we did do that. We did do that.
So you do grassroots work, a lot of fundraising. What else do you do when you're wearing your chairwoman's hat?
Well, you do want to work on increasing participation. You and I have spoken about that. There are lots of ways to do that. You try some ways, and sometimes they don't work out, and then you try others and that do work out. And sometimes a beer kegger bus thing works one season, and it doesn't work another season. So you just keep trying, and you calibrate your events according to that. Other things that are just practical things, such as the caucuses. The caucus is coming up for here, March the 4th. That'll be both for the Republican Party and the Democratic Party of the state of Colorado.
And again,
it's
when
March
you're talking
4th.
caucus, this is the equivalent of the primary?
That's correct, but we're a caucus state.
Right.
So yes, correct. And so that does bring participation from the party loyalists, more of the party loyalists, because it brings all your precinct captains together and they have
So
their
do you
caucus.
run that? I haven't been to a
Yes.
caucus.
Yes,
you
we
lead
do
the
run
caucus.
it. See,
Blanca leads the caucus.
Blanca leads the caucus for the
Awesome.
Republican Party. Frida
No,
Wallison
Frida does
does.
Republican, you do
I mean, for the Democratic Party, excuse me, Frida Wallison does it for the Republican Party. Blanca O'Leary
If you
does
guys
for the
switch
Democratic
places for the caucuses, who knows what would happen, right?
Yes, I don't think that it would be interesting, but yeah, that would be very funny too. Yeah, no, that's not going to happen.
So you definitely keep busy.
I do. We do another thing. For the State of the Union, I've done almost every State of the Union that I've been the chair. We've done the State of the Union Watch Party, which is really a fun party. It's not a fundraiser. You don't have to work. You just get to go. Everybody brings appetizers and soft drinks and wine and beer, and we watch the State of the Union address. The last time we had a call in from the president, because the president, we signed up to be an official party, and so the president calls in to all the official parties, and then we just get to discuss what went on. And we're political junkies, some of us, and so just to be able to chat and have like a little salon afterwards is something fun, and it doesn't cost anything, and it's just a fun thing. So we do the little events like that throughout the year too.
So let's do a quick commercial for you. Anyone's interested in reaching out to you and getting active in the local Democrats, and again, becoming part of the game or getting involved here, how do they find you?
There's 2 or 3 ways. We have our website, which is pitkincountydemocrats.org. That's the website. On Facebook, we are the Pitkin County Democratic Party on Facebook. Also, they can email me, and that's how most people do. And my email is blancainaspen@aol.com. So,
are you the only Blanca in Aspen?
yes, I am, in the United States.
I'm the only Steve Nemirovsky in the United States.
Yes,
so
yes.
we got something in common there, right?
Yes, yes.
Interesting. All right, so I want to switch gears a bit now, because one of the things we haven't talked yet about the show, which I think disturbs so many people in politics right now, is the lack of civility.
Right.
you know, you watch these news shows, and I think they're horrible. Whether it's a Democratic-leaning show or a Republican-leaning show, or if you want to call it liberal versus conservative, half the show is messaging, and the other half of the show is just trying to trash the other guys. You know, everybody's extreme, everybody's destroying the universe, and I find that, and I think most people don't find that reprehensible. And then we have the campaigning that goes on. We have these soundbite commercials, and so many of them are on the attack, right? So you've been doing this, well, you said you got in at 11, so you've been doing this for at least 10 years, right?
Yes, yeah.
What are the changes that you've seen over the years, and how we got from, I think, a time when we argued politically. By the way, I'm not against dysfunction and polarization, but I'm for then you come together and solve problems. How did we lose that? How did we lose the civility, and how did we get on this track of blame? So what's your perspective on that?
I don't think there's one answer, and I wouldn't think you would think that either. It's much more nuanced than that. I think one of the roots of it, though, is that compromise has become a dirty word. I've been reading this interesting book that Chris Matthews, of all people, put out. But he worked for Tip O'Neill when Tip was the Speaker of the House, who was an incredibly progressive person. And Ronald Reagan was obviously the president at that time, who was a very conservative president. But they all got along. And
so we're talking in the 80s.
We're talking in the 80s. And
you weren't even born yet. So,
yeah, yes, I'm 56 years old. I was very born. But they both said that they stopped politics at 5 p.m. and then they would even have cocktails often. That doesn't happen anymore. It was a plus at that time to be able to compromise. Ronald Reagan didn't always get what he wanted from Congress. Congress didn't always get everything they wanted from the president. They knew they couldn't pass a bill and send it to the president's desk that was too progressive or too liberal. The president would veto it, and vice versa. The president did know how to compromise and give on certain, even on major pieces of legislation. This happened quite often. Actually, it happened until, I think, the rise of the Tea Party. And I respect the fact that
you think it took all the way to the rise of the Tea Party? Because some people would say it may have started with Gingrich in the 90s.
Of course, yes.
And then,
that part, yes.
And then the Democratic response under Clinton. So some people would put it back to the mid-90s.
Yeah. The lack of civility has steadily been coming up. That is correct. But the lack of compromise, the total 100% lack of compromise, just happened recently. I mean, it hasn't been, even in the years with Gingrich and Clinton, they did pass legislation. When you see the charts, we've all seen the charts of the amount of legislation that has been passed under this Congress versus every other Congress combined, and you see the part, you know, the bar graph, everybody else is like up here, down around, and the bar graph for the last Congress is down here. Right. It's because there is no compromise. I mean, it's come to a complete halt. I'm not saying that there hasn't been lack of civility before. Yes, of course there has been. But this complete halt of compromise so that we can't pass any legislation, that is a pretty recent phenomenon.
So we had this growing phenomenon, but you think it's this recent Tea Party stuff that's kind of pushed us over the edge?
And the Tea Party alone isn't responsible. I mean, we did have to have that lead up of the two parties not getting along and the lack of civility. But people also say that there's 100% parity. I don't think there is always 100% parity as to who's the most guilty, because I think sometimes it goes back and forth, I would imagine. But I mean, on Fox News, there is not one TV host that has a 3-hour program that's a liberal. On MSNBC, even though the conservative people despise it, there is a 3-hour host who is a star of MSNBC, Joe Scarborough, who has a 3-hour program, who pretty much gets to talk the entire time. That there is no counterpart of that to Fox News. I'm not going to tell you that MSNBC is the benchmark of all 100% balance, but they're much more balanced than Fox News, and so. I know you wearing a Democratic hat about 100% of the time. But correct.
See, this is where I blame both parties, and I'll give you two examples that I think bother most people. You have this situation, and it really came to a fever pitch lately in the Senate when they did the nuclear option thing. But you had this since, again, I think back to Clinton, where we've had Democratic, now Republican, now Democratic president. And when the president are making their nominations, whether it's to the court or an office, the other party is doing everything they can to block
Correct.
that. But both parties are doing it to each other.
Exactly. But the percentage of people that were confirmed under Bush and Clinton were much higher than the percentage
Right, it just keeps getting worse and worse.
Yes, but never has there been the dramatic drop-off that there is under Barack Obama.
But I get that. What I'm saying is, but each party keeps doing it to each other. And even on the debt ceiling, same thing. You know, when Bush wanted to extend the debt ceiling, you know, we have these tapes of our current president, you know, giving speeches against that, and then he becomes president, and now the Republicans attack him. So what I'm saying is, it's been building and building.
This is where I'm coming back to. There is no parity. That is correct that they said that, but that never, ever came to the brink. And no Democratic controlled Congress would have done the same thing that our Congress did, this Republican-controlled Congress did under President Obama.
So how do we get out of this pattern? How do we...
I'm not certain, but I will.
What are your ideas?
I'm not certain, but something interesting happened last night, and I think you might have heard it this morning. Glenn Beck went on and admitted that he thought it was fun and that he kind of apologizes for being so divisive and dividing the country.
Well, that's a good start.
Yeah, and Glenn Beck wasn't alone. I mean, I know there's people on both sides, but that's an interesting start.
Sure.
He was one of the most successful people leading the charge on his side of the opinion polls. So that's quite interesting to see that happen. We'll see how that.
You know what's nice about that, and what I think in this lack of civility, people aren't able to say they're sorry or they made a mistake anymore.
Yeah.
Where do we lose that? When do we lose the ability to say I was sorry, I made a mistake?
Perhaps television.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. The other thing that does happen, and maybe this might bring it back down again, is I go back to the Tea Party because there are a lot of moderates in both parties. There are a lot of moderate Republicans. However, they are so afraid of being primaried by a Tea Party person that calls them too liberal, which is ridiculous because they are not too liberal, that they will not take any stance that would be seen in the least bit compromising. And that, I think, has really helped polarize the Republican Party to a party that doesn't even allow any moderates. The Democrats did that too in the 70s and early 80s, and then, you know, you saw us have terrible results because of that. So we went through that too, but now I think that our counterparts are doing that. Our friends on the Republican side are doing that, and they're allowing the minority, which is the Tea Party, to call the shots, and I think that really hurts a lot of civility. That hurts compromise. I'm not telling you that the Democrats are blameless. I'm just telling you that the Tea Party controlled Republican Party is.
I agree with you. Right now, the Republican Party seems to have a dynamic that's working against them. But as you said, and I find this to be the case, not something I've done a study of, when the party that's in power of the presidency, such as you are now, the party usually says, we got to get our act together because we're running the country. A little more. Yeah. But then you said when you're in the cycle where the Republicans have the presidency, that's when I find the Democrats seem to be a little more in disarray because they're trying to find their identity somewhat. So I think that does go back and forth, but it's still not a recipe for the civility I'm looking for. Let me throw you a curveball here. So I do a lot of work back in Illinois. I do a lot of lobbying. And there are women in the legislature, great ladies. They do a great job of lobbying. And one of their things they say is we have, you know, a male governor back there, a male head of the House for both caucuses. The Speaker is a male, the head of the Republicans is a male, and then the Senate, head of the Senate. Now we have a female minority leader in the Senate, but they say when these guys get in a room, there's too much testosterone. Now, you were talking about women before. Do you think having more women elected for both parties could help strike some of the balance and bring some civility? Do you think we have to find a way to do something like that?
I definitely do. Also, it isn't just because it's more women. Also, it's more of a diversity and people that are governing that really reflect more of what the population looks like. Since 50% of our population minimum is female, it only makes sense from that standpoint. The other thing that does happen, you'll see that a lot of a lot of women in the U.S. Senate have said both Republican and Democratic women, female senators, are the ones that really push to have a budget deal come. even before Patty Murray was in the budget deal with Paul Ryan. So yes, I do really think that women do push for consensus more. I know we're going to get in trouble with our male counterparts, but you know,
I started it.
I'm used to. I'm used to that. Then we also have something very interesting in the Colorado Senate. Do you know that our state Senate has majority female? It's one of the few.
Did not know that.
Maybe the only state Senate in the United States at this moment that has
that.
majority female. So, and then we passed some pretty wonderful pieces of legislation together with our governor. You know, during the last session, it was a monumental session here in the state of Colorado. That could be part of it.
So is that something when you're wearing your
women
hat
get things done
as a chairwoman? I'm not going to fight you on that.
Yes, yeah.
I can't fight my wife on it either, right? Do you get involved in selecting candidates, and do you try and help find women candidates to
Very
run for office?
much. We try to as a party chair, all party chairs have done this before, and that is part of our role, is to try to always seek candidates to fill the seats and fill vacancies. Because we haven't had a lot of women before, I'm always trying to recruit more women. We're very lucky that running for Senate right now, but unfortunately, our wonderful Senator Gail Schwartz is term limited. So there is another female running, and her name is Carrie Donovan. She is a rancher and a teacher and a ski instructor from the Vail Valley. Her family is a very old ranching family, very young, dynamic, very thoughtful person, and you will be seeing her here a lot. So Gail helped recruit her. Our state representative is Millie Hamner, and she's also female. So we do have a lot of good female representation within our state part here from our Roaring Fork Valley. We haven't had a female mayor in a long time, though, too. So I mean,
interesting.
Yeah.
So you think if we had more females, and again, I don't want to overgeneralize or label male female here, will that help on the campaigning side? Because again, we don't have any civility on the campaigning. Do you think the female component to elections maybe ratchets down a little?
It does often. It does often. I would venture to say, you know, vice presidential candidate Sarah Palin didn't do that, but she's an anomaly, because I do think both females on both sides, Republicans and Democratic females, you do see their candidacies be a little bit more civil.
So we have at least one solution today. We're going to go find more females to run for office, and maybe more female executives. How many female executives do we have at the governor level? Do you have any idea?
Do you mean within the governor's cabinet?
Yeah, with 50 governors. How many do you have?
Female governors. I don't know off the top of my head. Maybe 5, 6. So
yeah, not many there.
Yes, not many.
All right, you'll be pushing for that, right?
Yes. Well, we will soon. Right now, Governor Hickenlooper, we're very much a big supporter of
I didn't
Governor
mean just
Hickenlooper.
Colorado.
Yes,
but you're on the national committee.
Correct.
So.
Yes.
All right. Well,
I also serve with and help Emily's List, which is Early Money is Like Yeast, which is a very large nonprofit that helps women become women candidates win office on all levels. So I mean, it's on local levels, state levels, and of course national.
I think we could just do a 1-hour introduction on everything you do.
Yeah, we're going to also have more civility, I think, when we have a female president, which may be happening.
You may get that too.
Yeah. So
in closing, before the show started, you and I were talking about some of the issues of dysfunction and polarization, and you brought up something that's very important to me. I've talked about on the show: registering to vote.
Correct.
And getting active.
Yes.
So
I do kid my friends, and I think you said you do a version of it too. If they are eligible to vote and they're not registered, they don't vote, they don't get to gripe. If you don't vote, you don't gripe.
So we're going to do a quick commercial right now for people who live in Pitkin County. Tell them how to get registered to vote.
It's really easy. It's pitkinvotes.org, pitkinvotes.org, and our county clerk, Janice, is an excellent county clerk. They have a wonderful website.
Wonderful website. Woman running the show.
Now that's why we're so organized. It's a very user-friendly, very easy way to register to vote. If you're a mom and you have a 17-year-old in your household, encourage them to go online. 17-year-olds can now pre-register.
How long does it take, start to finish, to register to vote?
It's taken most of the times when I do this, maybe 2 minutes for people.
A whole
Just have
2 minutes, right?
Have your driver's license
Okay.
ready. It took about 2 minutes.
Could be-
We do it a lot. We used to do it at the farmers market. So we do
Could be
this a
like
lot.
one of those commercials on TV, you know, where they're sitting there and doing all their banking while
Yes,
they're cooking dinner and doing
exactly.
everything else. So
Yes.
we can get the whole family registered to
Yes,
vote in
yes,
2
Mom.
minutes, right?
Yes, Mom.
Okay.
Yes, we do. We have a, we do have, it's quiet right now, but we are going to have a very competitive U.S. Senate race for Senator Udall. We're going to have a very competitive state Senate race here with Carrie Donovan.
People should register to
Yes,
vote.
you need to register, and the governor's race is going to be competitive.
Well, it's always
Thank
wonderful to be graced by royalty.
Oh,
Thank you for
Steve,
joining
stop.
us. and
Thank you very
please come
much.
back
It's
and
a
visit us
pleasure.
again.
Thank you for
Okay.
having me.
I certainly hope you enjoyed that segment with Blanca. She's a very colorful character, and she spent a lot of her life in government. And I'll tell you, she's also very involved in the local community activities here in Aspen. It's one of the things we talked about on this show, just the need to get involved, to get active. If getting involved in politics is not your thing, get involved in your local community. And sometimes you'll see that there's a spillover, because oftentimes local community involvement will be touched by government somewhere along the line. And that we've been encouraging the need to get involved. And you can't come away from an interview with Blanca without understanding me fascinated with how dedicated she's been and how involved she's been, particularly in the political world. As we mentioned at the start of the show, perhaps the most apparent area of dysfunction, at least in government these days, revolves around our budgeting and our federal deficit. So what we want to talk about today is maybe a little bit of a educational segment on what it's about to pass a budget, and then in the next show we're going to talk about the deficit. But I don't think many people understand the budgeting process, and in particular what it means when we don't have a budget, because we haven't had a budget for most of the past over 3 years in this country. Well, the budgeting in this sense is no different than the budgeting that all of us do with our families. Every day and every year, at some point, we sit down and we say, here's how much is coming in, which means that's how much we have to spend. And then the question is, how much are we going to spend it on? Now, some families I know do it to the penny, and they do it either weekly or monthly. Some families may have an annual budget, and some families don't have a budget. And I think you'll find the families that don't have a budget are the ones that wake up one day and find out that they've got serious financial problems. I'm a big believer in budgets, because if nothing else, you need to know where you stand for your family, and in this case for your country, in terms of the amount coming in and the amount going out. So in theory, every year, the federal government is supposed to have a budget. And that started last October 1 again, and it runs through this September. And we actually do have a budget now in the federal government. It was passed just last month. But we haven't had a budget here for many years. The process for a budget starts with the president. The president is charged with introducing a budget to Congress, and the president usually delivers his budget sometime around the first week of February. Now, this is the president's vision for what the budget should be. And the president doesn't make the laws, however. It's incumbent upon Congress to actually pass a law which includes the budget. And budget laws are called appropriations. Appropriations meaning the spending of money. So the president has made a suggestion at the beginning of February, and it's now up to Congress to decide how they want to take the president's suggestion, move things around, and ultimately come up with legislation. So the first thing they normally do in Congress are pass what they call budget resolutions. These are usually passed sometime in the spring, and they usually dictate kind of a limit that is going to be spent in the budget. Not totally dissimilar to what we talked about with the family, where you consider what all your resources are, so you know what you have to spend. Since the federal government is actually allowed to borrow money, they're not limited strictly by what they take in, but they do try to set and pass resolutions in the spring of each year to at least set the framework for the budget talks. Now, in most years, the Senate and the House will have their own version of what this number should be, and they often come together and reconcile that, and then they have a joint resolution which will set a number. Again, I don't think we've had a joint resolution in this country up until very recently, at least for most of the last 3 or 4 years, because we haven't agreed on almost anything. That's the dysfunctional part of all this. The next step for Congress would then be to have its various budgeting committees, its various appropriation committees, come up with a structure for their spending allocation. So there's a subcommittee that deals with education issues, transportation issues, and they're charged with coming up with a budget for their allocation of the spending and then what they're going to spend the money on. All of these committees report their bills back to the full Congress, and then the House will pass a budget usually, and the Senate will pass a budget. Or it could be that the House will pass a budget over to the Senate, and they may tweak it and send it back. There's a couple different ways this could happen. But hopefully at the end of the day, and hopefully certainly before October 1, which is the start of the fiscal year, Congress will have passed a budget. Now again, we haven't had a budget pass in this country for over almost 4 years until very recently. So what happens when there's no budget? What happens when you wake up on October 1 and no budget has been passed? Well, something has to happen, because if there is no law, then there's no spending authority. And that's when you hear these government shutdown discussions. Government will shut down if there's no spending authority. If you can't spend money, people can't be paid. If you can't spend money, you can't pay your debt sometimes. So without these laws being passed, the government will shut down, and we have seen government shutdowns. Again, another example of the dysfunction in the system. But what they have done in the absence of budgets is pass what's known as continuing resolutions. And a continuing resolution just has the effect of saying, you know what we did last year, we'll just keep doing that because we can't figure out what to do in the alternative. It's kind of a cop-out, but at least it keeps the doors open, it keeps the trains running, it keeps the lights on. Continuing resolutions. But again, they are basically just saying we'll keep spending the way we have. It doesn't reflect the members of Congress doing the job they were hired to do and actually make some hard decisions about the fact that there's not enough money for what they want to spend it on, and where's this money going to go? That's what should be resolved through the Appropriations Committee process and ultimately the passing of the budget. So we now have the construct for how budget should be passed. We have the timing for how it should be passed. And you have the notion that they can pass a continuing resolution just to keep the doors open and the lights on. In the United States right now, each year, our budget has been in the range of $3.5 to $4 trillion. It's a big number. But also each year, we are spending considerably more than is being produced in revenues. Now, the bulk of the revenues that come in are taxes and fees and other items of that sort. So in most years, we are taking in X, but we're spending Y. And the Y has been significantly greater than X in most years. And that's where we come to the part where I mentioned before. The federal government has the authority to go borrow money to make up that gap. And it's that gap that, as it builds over time, that creates the federal deficit that you've heard about. So today we talked about the process for the budget. Next time we're going to talk about the process for the deficit, and both in the context of the fact that the polarization that we have in Congress is keeping us from having the compromise we need on these aspects, and that's creating the dysfunction. For our next interview, we're going to go a little bit outside the box. When people think of politics as usual, I think that the conversation generally tends towards what's going on in Washington, what's going on in the state capitol. But I'd suggest to you that perhaps the most real politics of all is what happens in your own backyard, and in particular what happens with your local schools, with your school board. To me, one of the most important topics, if not the most important topic for my household, is the education of my children. And America nowadays seems to have problems keeping up with our educational programs, and when we get scored internationally, our scores don't do very well. So I thought we'd take a little bit of a detour today, like I said, a little bit outside the box, and drill down and have a conversation about local school boards and the politics of local school boards, local school board elections. In order to get there, we're going to draw from our friends at Ballotpedia, and again, as you know, I'm a big fan of Ballotpedia. It's a great source for political information. And Ballotpedia has started a school board project, and we have with us today Daniel, I got to find your last name here, Daniel Anderson, and he is the head of the school board project. So Daniel, thank you for joining us today, and maybe by way of introduction, you can tell us a little bit about what the school board project means and how it works at Ballotpedia.
Sure, well, thank you for your time today. The School Board Elections Project with Ballotpedia began earlier this year during the late spring, early summer, and the basic idea is to cover the top 1,000 school districts in the United States of America as measured by enrollment, as total student enrollment. So, as you might imagine, the top few school districts are, say, the New York City Department of Education, maybe Denver Public Schools for a more local example. And what we do is we cover what's happening in those school districts So the annual budget, um, academic performance, teacher salaries, that sort of information. And we also cover the school board elections in those 1,000 school districts. So we have pages on the election itself and each of the candidates.
So let me understand this. You keep a range of statistics, including academic performance. So if someone is in one of these top 1,000 school districts and they want to know how their school district's performing, they can go on Ballotpedia and actually look at academic performance?
That's correct. We're still building up the top 1,000 school districts, so it's possible that your school district may not have those statistics yet, but we're well on our way there. And since there isn't really a national set of standards for academic performance, usually what we use is most states have some sort of standardized test that the state uses internally. So those are the statistics we usually gather.
And then are you going to, at some point, offer comparative data so someone living in New York can compare their schools to Denver and, as you said, these other school districts?
We're going to do the best we can to do those sorts of comparisons and studies, because that's really, ultimately, that's sort of what people want to know is how does my school district stack up, not only against the next door district, but against the big districts across the country. We can only really work with the statistics that are out there. Sometimes standardized tests are just too different from one another to really compare. But when possible, we're absolutely going to make those sorts of comparisons.
And same thing on budgeting. What type of budget information will you have online, and where do you get that from?
In almost all cases, we get the budgets from the school district website. And we divide those budgets into a few different categories. Staff expenses, so salaries, wages, benefits, operational expenses, student services, debt servicing, and other expenses. And then we have the total budget figure. In some cases, school districts don't actually bother to post their annual budget online. So in those cases, we get the budgets from either a state database, a few different states have databases for school district budgets, or we can actually get slightly older data from the United States Census Bureau.
So as I said earlier, I find this topic fascinating and so relevant today in terms of anyone who has children, they want to know how the school district's doing. What was the impetus for this? How did you or Leslie Graves or the think tank back at Ballotpedia, what caused you to get this project started?
Well, it's really, what Ballotpedia is trying to do is connect people to politics. And it's less difficult to do that on the federal level because most people are interested in who the president is, who their congressman is. But as you mentioned at the start of this, there are very important decisions being made on the local level. So we've started a municipal government project recently, and before that we started the school board elections project, because we recognize that school board members are making hugely important decisions. They're deciding who the superintendent of the school district is, or they're firing the superintendent. They're approving budgets in the ranges of hundreds of millions of dollars, and voter turnout in these elections are usually very, very low. So we thought that this was a really important place where we could help people to understand school boards better, to understand school board elections better, to provide them more information so that they could get more involved.
Now, your site is a wiki site, and we have talked about that in another program. You haven't been up and running that long. Are you finding that people are becoming engaged and joining you at that level and giving you feedback and input so far, or is that a little too young in the process?
Well, I imagine the other projects might be receiving even more input, but we've received a significant amount of reader interest, whether that's just page views, or we've also received a lot of information from local citizens saying, hey, I noticed that your profile of this candidate running in my school district doesn't have a picture, or it doesn't mention where he went to college. And maybe that information isn't available anywhere, but I know the guy. I can get you that information. Or sometimes it's the candidates themselves who contact us. So we are receiving a significant amount of reader engagement. People are interested in these school board elections.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. On our show, what we're trying to do is get people engaged, and I think if by you drilling down to the local school board level, that's something that people might be able to grab on a little too more easily. As you said, you'll get a call from someone, it's my buddy, right? It's more personal to them. It's at that level. We talked in one of our last shows about the fact that voter turnout is so low across the board in the United States. First of all, registration is low, and then turnout is low. What is the average turnout for a school board election? Is there such a thing as an average turnout?
Well, there has to be an average turnout statistically. I can't tell you definitively or authoritatively what the average turnout is across the board. What's interesting about talking about local education and public education is there's disagreement about the most fundamental statistics. For example, the National Center for Education Statistics says there's around 13,000 school districts in the country. The United States Census Bureau says, oh no, there's more than 14,000. So statistics that simple are disputed. There is an agreement. I can say that on average, from what we've found from our research and our coverage of elections in the latter half of 2013, we found that between 5 to 10% turnout seems to be about the norm.
Wait,
and there are cases where you'll see even lower than that.
You said 10% turnout?
5 to 10%.
Now, is that 5 to 10% of the registered voters or of the eligible voters?
I believe it's of the eligible voters, although in some cases it's absolutely of the registered voters. There are some school districts where it's just incredibly low.
And I think that's an example here of some of the math we were doing on an earlier show. I had some statistics, I don't recall them exactly, where basically there's over 200 million people that could register to vote in the United States, but 60-some million don't even register to begin with, and then another 20 million don't vote. So in the presidential election, you had 80 million out of 200-some million that didn't show up. But if I'm hearing you correctly, in your district, you may have a voter population of 10,000, let's say, and only 500 are showing up to vote?
Sure, that has absolutely happened before.
It's fairly disgusting. In most cases, are school boards, how are they getting slated? Do they go through a primary process, party-based process? Is it nonpartisan? How are these fields developed to get on the ballot in the first place?
Well, the first thing to understand about school board elections is that there's no consistent standard whatsoever. Certainly not across the country, usually not in the same state, sometimes not even in the same region of a state. So the answer is really all of the above. What's most common is nonpartisan elections where candidates file with the local city clerk or the county clerk, sometimes with the school district itself, and so they file to run, and then there's a general election, and whoever gets the most votes wins, that plurality system. But what happens sometimes is there are primary elections or runoff elections. And you mentioned parties, and that's a really interesting thing about school board elections that most people don't realize, is there are partisan school board elections. They're not incredibly common, but they're not incredibly rare either. Usually they pop up in just a handful of states, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Connecticut. But even in those cases, it doesn't really work how you might think. For example, in Virginia, most school board candidates can decide to file as a partisan candidate, as a Republican, as a Democrat. But in the vast majority of cases we've seen, they've decided to run as an independent. Similarly, in Pennsylvania, candidates have the option of cross-filing, which means that a candidate can file to run in both the Democratic and the Republican nomination races, primary races. Just imagine Mitt Romney cross-filing to run for the Democratic nomination and the Republican nomination. So even when there are partisan school board elections, you'll see a lot of instances where candidates go out of their way to appear nonpartisan.
We had a phenomenon here locally in Aspen Snowmass School District where we did not have a full slate of candidates. Are you finding across the country that they are attracting a full slate of candidates and it's a competitive, or is it not necessarily being competitive?
Usually, what you'll see is that there is a full slate of candidates, but the candidates are either running unopposed or they're facing one or two challengers at most. Sometimes you'll see really competitive races, and those turn out to be very interesting.
Yeah, I think that's unfortunate that maybe one of the most critical elected positions we have in our country, deciding who the superintendent's going to be, setting the budget, making decisions on pension, and his whole range of decisions, is really not competitive. It's not really part of an elective process. It's almost a volunteer process at the end of the day. As you said, people run unopposed. And then you wake up one day and you look at your school systems, and I'm not picking anyone's school system, and say, our country's suffering. So I would hope we could get to the point where we could get this a little more competitive, and maybe our show can help boost some people to get active in that level. Quickly, as in our remaining time, and when I say remaining time, I'm thinking we should do more on this in another segment. So let's you and I talk about that.
Okay.
Anyone who wants to find out about your project, get the Ballotpedia and drill down and look at their district, get the data. How do they get there? Give them some guidelines on how to work your site and how to get the most out of it.
Sure. Well, the website is ballotpedia.org, and when you click on there, the main page, you'll see a map of the United States, and then on the right-hand side, you'll see some bullet points with links to our various projects, so Congress, state legislatures, ballot measures, and school boards. If you click on the school board's link, you'll come to a portal page where, again, there's a map of the United States. So you can click on your state to be brought to a page that might be something like Colorado school districts. And from there, you'll find links to a list of school districts in Colorado, specific school district pages, list of elections in Colorado. So that would be the primary way of navigating the website. And we absolutely encourage everyone to look into their local school boards to get engaged. If you see that we don't have the information that you're looking for on that page, let us know. All the time we're adding new components, new information to these pages to make them better and more accessible for readers.
Well, Daniel, great luck with your project. As always, I think you guys at Ballotpedia are a little bit ahead of your time. And I encourage anyone that's watching this segment to, again, get on Ballotpedia, get engaged in your school district, find out when the elections are, and look at these budgets, look at these decisions that are being made, and then, again, make the input. So thank you. All the best to you, and hopefully we'll catch up again soon.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for watching None of the Above. We hope you were educated and we hope you were entertained. For today's homework assignment, since we're on the notion of civility, and as I said at the beginning, I think some of the lack of civility is being driven by the media. What I'd like you to think about doing is, if you watch a TV show, you listen to a radio show, you read the newspaper, and what you see you think is just a little too inappropriate, it's a little too out there, it's a little too much. They're talking about people being too extreme. They're talking about people lying. They're just not helping the cause of civility, so to speak. I'd like you to think of contacting them. Pick up the phone, shoot them an email, and say, you know what? I really like your show. I really like your radio program. I read your column all the time. But do we really need this lack of civility? Can we find a way to maybe have improved discourse? And the way you wrote this column, the way you presented your commentary on television today, it was a great insight, and the message was good, but it's what you said. It's not what you said, it's how you said it. It was the tone, it was the lack of civility. So think about reaching out. I think if enough people start touching the media and letting them know that they're getting a little out of context here, it'll help rein them in, and we will introduce more civility. As always, please remember, if you are not part of the solution, you are part of the problem.